In the northeastern part of Venice Lagoon, not far from Burano and Mazzorbo, there is a truly enchanting island rich in history, Torcello, a magical place where you can discover the origins of Venice and relive an atmosphere of other times between nature, silence, and art. About 10 kilometers from the city, Torcello is however inextricably linked to it, as it was the first center of power that developed in the lagoon, as well as the most prosperous, rich in churches, monasteries, and fervent economic center, until the decline following the birth of nearby Venice. In fact, more than any other island preserves the testimonies of the birth of the first lagoon settlements. For years, it was believed that the island had developed following the transfer of the inhabitants of the flourishing Roman colony of Altino, devastated by the barbarian invasions that spread inland, becoming in a short time one of the main centers of the Venetian lagoon, and that, due to the growing influence of Venice, the inhabitants had migrated to the powerful neighbor, abandoning the island to a slow and inexorable decline. But there are evidence which suggests that the island was inhabited in Roman times and inserted in a territorial system that pivoted on Altino. The archaeological finds found on the island date a stable occupation between the 1st and the 2nd centuries AD. Already in Roman times, in fact, the lagoon part in front of the mainland was used for economic activities and livelihood. From here, an organized road network and a path through the lagoon branched, allowing communication with Ravenna and the Byzantine world, and the navigable rivers allowed to reach the inland cities and the port outlets on the shores, putting it in communication with the open sea. In such an organization, the lagoon islands had to provide landings and intermediate stations and therefore be populated, even if they were in all probability settlements of men dedicated to hunting, fishing, and salt gathering. It is not to be excluded that the islands also hosted suburban villas in imperial times, as reported in some verses of the Latin poet Martial. In fact, history shows us the beginning of the decline of Altino and the real birth of Torcello as a town in 452 AD, when the invasions of Attila's Huns forced the inhabitants to abandon their city. But compared to the past, today it is thought that the passage of the population from the mainland to the lagoon area happened as the basis had already been created to make possible the transfer of the population from Altina to the islands. In addition to that, in 639, after the fall of their city in Lombard hands, the inhabitants of Altino took refuge en masse in the islands of the lagoon, and among the marshes, life began to reorganize and the population in Torcello became more numerous. This is well known because reclamation and embankment works were carried out, with the creation of pie dwellings, terraces, and farming. These interventions, therefore, made possible the creation of a urban structure, thus transforming the existing settlement. This date also refers to the construction of the first basilica, dedicated to the Mother of God. Next to Torcello also began to populate the smaller islands that, in memory of the ancient city of the mainland, took the name of its gates. Thus were born the toponyms of Mazzorbo, Burano, Murano, Costanziaca, Amiana, Amianella, Centranica, islands that over time shined for their churches and convents. The first testimony of the name Torcello appears in the agreement signed on February 23, 840 AD, between Venice and the Holy Roman Empire. For a long time, it was thought that the name derived from one of the oldest gates of Altino, a salt marsh placed at the western limit with the purpose of defense. But other hypotheses have been made, such as turricellum, i.e. tower sky, perhaps due to the fact that at distance it is possible to see the tip of the bell tower that rises up to the sky, or others in connection to the rural world, like troculum, i.e. press, or tursa, bundle of hay. The Altinati left the city bringing with them their material and spiritual treasures, especially the relics of Saint Heliodorus, the first bishop of Altino and patron saint later of the Torcello island. The most important archaeological evidence of this period is undoubtedly provided by the epigraph of the cathedral. Traces on vineyards and orchards also date back this same period, thus showing an active place from an agricultural point of view. However, it was not the only activity present on the island. Thanks to some findings, we are also aware of the fact that here there was also a glass workshop, metallurgical craft, and above all, commercial activities, well before Rialto. In the 12th and 13th century, when trade entered into crisis, Torcello saw the flourishing of woolen clothes. In 1272, in fact, a resolution of the Venetian Senate allowed this type of processing only here. The proximity to the flourishing Venice led to the decline of the island. From the 15th century onwards, work began on diverting the last rivers flowing into the lagoon because of the real danger of completely burying this area of water. In this period, in fact, was also diverted the Sile, which flowed in front of Torcello, causing the swamping of this strip of land with the consequent poor healthiness of the place. To make matters worse were also the constant plagues and malaria. With the decline of Torcello, the buildings went into ruin or were dismantled by the Venetians, who used bricks and stone materials to build their city. The island was thus depopulated to the benefit of Murano and Venice. The community practically disappeared, but the diocese of Torcello, although moved to the island of Murano, survived until 1818, when during the Napoleonic occupation its suppression took place. At the same time, the cathedral became a simple parish. Today the island preserves the memory of its ancient splendor in a few structures that resisted the erosion of time, such as the Church of Santa Fosca, the Devil's Bridge, the Throne of Attila, the Archaeological Museum, and the Basilica of Santa Maria Assunta, the oldest building in the entire lagoon. To the ancient charm of the island is also added the Locanda Cipriani, so loved by Hemingway, whose passion for Venice and the lagoon were the setting for the novel Beyond the River and Among the Trees, but also by other celebrities who love peace and privacy. To date, 11 people live on a permanent basis. It seems that at one time it counted at least 30,000. It's hard to imagine it so populated, seeing it now. Legends and curiosities. Walking around the island, you will come across quite unique artifacts and, as such, have given inspiration for local legends. The Devil's Bridge. Legend has it that during the Austrian domination of Venice, a young woman had fallen in love with a Viennese soldier who was killed by her family, opposed to the union. The desperate girl turned to a sorceress who gave her an appointment in Torcello, an isolated place and therefore perfect for magical rites. The sorceress invoked the devil on the bridge, and he brought up the beloved who took the girl away. But, as we know, the devil does nothing for nothing, and the sorceress promised him that for 7 years on Christmas Eve she would bring him the soul of a child who just had died. The witch, however, died shortly after in a fire and could not honor the pact. So even today, it seems that on the night of December 24th of each year, on the Devil's Bridge, he comes in vain to claim his souls under the guise of a large black cat. Attila's throne. It is located in the square in front of the Church of Santa Fosca. Legend has it that during the invasion of the Huns in Italy in the 5th century, they would have arrived as far as the island of Torcello, where the inhabitants of Altino had taken refuge. The stone throne would be even used by the king, Attila, called the Scourge of God, for his ferocity towards enemies. In fact, they were never got here. However, it dates back the 5th century, when the first community was formed on the island. It was used as a seat of the Magister Militum, the governor of the island, during council meetings and when administering justice. Do not miss a visit to the Basilica of Santa Maria Assunta, a 1,000-year-old building dating back 1008. It stands on the foundations of the Church of the Mother of God and the subsequent extension of the 9th century, which houses a wonderful and frightening mosaic of the 13th century of the Last Judgment. On the way to access the bell tower, from which you can admire a unique panorama of the whole lagoon, pay attention to the wall of the church. You will notice the curious Istrian stone shutters. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.